Number 1. Elmer McCurdy's post-mortem odyssey. When ex-train robber Elmer McCurdy fell under sheriff's bullets in rural Oklahoma in 1911, it seemed his story ended there. With no relatives to claim him, the funeral home owner embalmed the body with arsenic, dressed it, propped it in a display case, and began charging a nickel per viewing. The corpse became an attraction, and soon circus owners paid for it. With a forged receipt, they took the man who couldn't be hanged on the road to traveling fairs, penny arcades, and years later, an amusement park in California. The skin dried out and was coated in paint, wax, and dust. No one remembered it had once been a man. In 1976, during filming of the series The $6 Million Man, a set designer tried to reposition the supposed mannequin and its hand broke, revealing real bone. If you thought relics were confined to museum cases, wait until you learn how this unwitting traveler finally found rest. Number 2. The U.S. Army's Camel Corps experiment. In 1856, War Secretary Jefferson Davis convinced Congress to release $30,000 for a curious experiment, importing camels from North Africa and Asia Minor to Texas. 44 animals disembarked at Indianola and were sent to Camp Verde near San Antonio, where soldiers learned, often reluctantly, to handle mounts that ignored commands and weren't spooked by bullets. The first official caravan covered nearly 1,200 miles to California, hauling loads twice as heavy as mules could bear. Reports praised the dromedary's resistance to thirst, heat, and sandstorms. But the Civil War interrupted the project. The post changed hands between Confederates and Union forces until it was abandoned. Without funds or expert handlers, some camels were auctioned off to circuses. The rest escaped into the desert. For decades, travelers reported slender silhouettes crossing the Texas twilight, and the last wild specimen was shot in 1941, closing the chapter on an army that never quite adapted to the new world. Number 3. Billy the Kid's mirror image. When we think of Billy the Kid, the most famous portrait shows the youth with a Winchester and a Colt slung at his left hip. For years, newspapers repeated that he was left-handed, giving him an advantage in quick-draw confrontations. The overlooked detail was in the rifle itself. The 1873 model ejects to the right, the standard position for right-handed shooters. The anomaly occurs because the portrait is a tintype, a cheap process that produced iron plates with a reversed image, like looking in a mirror. In Ben Kidder's makeshift Fort Sumner studio, the photographer didn't correct the inversion. When newspapers printed the image, editors unfamiliar with firearms reinforced the error. The misconception only began to fade when collectors noticed the bolt handle pointed backward, and historians cross-checked witness accounts describing Billy drawing with his right hand. Yet the myth persisted long enough to inspire screenwriters and sell posters. After all, a crooked legend often grabs more attention than a technical detail done right. Number 4. The gunfight at the OK Corral. On the morning of October 26, 1881, Tombstone awoke tense. The Earp brothers, Virgil, Wyatt, and Morgan, rode onto Fremont Street to demand that ranchers Clanton and McLaury surrender their weapons, as city ordinance required. The appointed meeting at the OK Corral actually took place in a narrow lot behind photographer C.S. Fly's studio, just steps from the actual corral. Virgil raised his sawed-off shotgun and announced the arrests. Doc Holliday, at his side, held a city marshal's rifle. In response, Billy Clanton drew his Colt .45. The first shot shattered the alley's silence. In less than half a minute, about 30 shots rang out, many so close they left powder burns on clothing. When the smoke cleared, Billy Clanton and the McLaury brothers lay dead. Ike Clanton and Billy Claiborne had fled. Doc Holliday, grazed by a bullet, smiled amid the powder haze. Though brief, the shootout sealed the Earp's reputation and transformed a banal dispute over gun control into an enduring legend of the American West. Number 5. The rise and fall of the Long Branch Saloon. The Long Branch Saloon opened its doors in Dodge City in 1874, when the railroad turned the old stagecoach stop into a cattle drive waypoint. Packed with drovers, gamblers, and traveling musicians, the establishment quickly became the roaring heart of Front Street. Cowboys were hired there, Deals for thousands of head of cattle were struck, and sometimes disputes were settled at pistol point before the Yellow Pine Bar. On April 5, 1885, a spark on the roof ended its original fame. Flames raced along the dry eaves, and in under an hour, nothing remained but ashes, twisted bottles, and the charred sign bearing its hand-painted name. Decades later, riding the wave of TV shows like Gunsmoke, local merchants erected a replica on the same block, this time of brick and concrete, but with wainscoted doors and kerosene lamps that visitors expect when they cross Kansas in search of the cowboy capital of the world. Number 6. Confirming Jesse James's resting place. When Robert Ford shot Jesse Woodson James on April 3, 1882, the county sheriff and dozens of onlookers confirmed the body displayed in St. Joseph was the nation's most wanted outlaw. Lying in state at the family farm, he was buried in Kearney under an unassuming gravestone. Nearly half a century later, however, an elderly bearded man appeared in Texas claiming to be Jesse W. James, and upon his death in 1951, he was interred in Granbury with an outlaw's epitaph. The standoff lasted until 1995. Archaeologists exhumed the Kearney grave, extracted DNA from the femur, and compared it with samples from 2 living maternal descendants. The result matched, ending a debate that spanned generations. 3 years later, Texas authorities ordered the same analysis on the Granbury coffin. The bones belonged to an unknown individual born around 1870. Yet the Texas headstone still receives flowers from those who prefer to believe Jesse fooled the law one last time. Number 7. The Gettysburg of the West at Glorieta Pass. In March 1862, the Confederate flag advanced through the arid valleys of the New Mexico Territory. Brigadier General Henry Sibley aimed to push on to Denver, seize Colorado's gold fields, and from there reach the Pacific. To stop him, a hastily assembled Colorado volunteer force marched nearly 400 miles to Glorieta Pass in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. On March 26th, pickets clashed among gnarled pines. 2 days later, roughly 1,300 men on each side fought hand-to-hand in a rock-choked corridor barely wide enough for 2 ranks. While Union infantry held the center, Major John Chivington flanked the Confederate wagon train, descended on the enemy rear, and burned the supply train at Johnson's Ranch. 80 wagons, 1,200 mules, ammunition, and light artillery. Starved of provisions and munitions, Sibley abandoned the field and began a long desert retreat, dooming the plan to carry the Civil War into the Rockies. Hence, historians dubbed Glorieta Pass the Gettysburg of the West. Number 8. The ancient cliff dwellers of Acoma Pueblo. Perched atop a sandstone mesa nearly 360 feet above the valley floor, Acoma Pueblo has overlooked the Rio San Jose Valley since at least the 11th century. When Spanish explorers first arrived in 1540, they found about 300 adobe dwellings arranged on 3 levels, accessible only by wooden ladders that could be withdrawn at night. The elevated position offered natural defense against enemy raids and created a microclimate that preserved corn and beans in rock-dug granaries. At the mesa's base, irrigated fields sustained the village, while caravans traded glazed pottery for salt and cotton from the south. In 1599, Captain Juan de Onat attempted to subdue the settlement. Fierce resistance led to a siege and massacre that reduced the population but did not break the Sky City. Over the centuries, the Acoma kept the Carasan language, restored ceremonial kivas, and after 1880 built a road for trucks. Yet the site remains the oldest continuously inhabited community in the United States. Number 9. How the Sundae was born. In the late 1880s, Sunday closing laws, known as Blue Laws, tried to enforce Sabbath rest across much of the West. In Evanston, Wyoming, regulations banned any effervescent beverage on Sundays, aimed at soda fountains that mixed syrup, carbonated water, and hidden spirits. On the morning of May 5, 1890, Clerk Charles Platt, pressed by customers still craving a treat, devised an ingenious solution. He scooped 2 balls of vanilla ice cream into a glass, drizzled thick chocolate syrup over them, topped it with a maraschino cherry, and served it as a Sunday soda, emphasizing that it contained neither bubbles nor alcohol. The novelty circulated only on the day of rest, skirting the law without offending local zealots, and the name soon shed its final O to avoid religious connotations. Before long, parlors from Minneapolis to El Paso were copying the recipe, cementing the sundae as a sweet act of defiance on the moral frontier of the Old West. Number 10. The Ostrich Postal Service Experiment. In 1893, amid the boom of ostrich farms, where thousands of birds grazed between Phoenix and Tucson, the Bisbee Stage and Express Transport Company decided to test a lightning mail service riding ostriches. Investors bet on the bird's speed. Contemporary reports claimed they could sprint nearly 40 miles per hour and straddle 8-foot strides. 3 birds were fitted with lightweight saddles and canvas mailbags. 2 riders mounted them while the 3rd bird ran tethered as a spare. The 93-mile Tucson-Bisbee route through cactus-studded desert was to be completed in under a day, outpacing mules and horses. On the dawn departure of April 12th, a rooster's crow spooked the trio, scattering letters in the dust. Hours later, near St. David, one ostrich attacked a saddlebag, tearing open a sack of bank checks. After 3 attempts, all marked by lost mail and spectacular tumbles, the experiment was called off. But not before generating entertaining headlines and cementing the legend that, in the Old West, even the Postal Service dared to fly on long legs. Number 11. Ban on pointed facial hair. In July 1882, Reverend Charles Endicott affixed an unexpected poster to the door of the First Methodist Church of Tombstone. Gentlemen with mustaches or pointed trimmed beards will not be admitted to worship. At first glance, it seemed a mere moralistic whim, but it had its roots in the town codes. City Hall was already taxing saloons whose bartenders sported waxed mustaches, in an attempt to keep away professional gamblers who advertised their luck by the shiny tips. Endicott took the zeal further, arguing in sermons that the theatrical mustache appeared at faro tables alongside cheap whiskey and profane language. The measure divided the faithful. Some hastily shaved off their whiskers before Sunday, while others, like stagecoach driver Jim Nugent, preferred to pray at the bar, turning the Longhorn Saloon into an improvised devotional meeting. Popular pressure lasted only a few months, and when winter brought tourists from Tucson, the Reverend relented, allowing mustaches back as long as they did not bear scented wax. Though brief, the prohibition stayed in the newspapers as a picturesque warning of the crusade against hair vitality in the Old West. Number 12. Midnight music curfew. Abilene was flourishing as the endpoint of the Chisholm Trail when, in 1871, the City Council approved an unusual order. The music in saloons must cease before the first toll of the midnight bell. Anyone who insisted on dancing afterward would pay a $10 fine, raised to $50 for the saloon owner. The rule was not aimed at moralism. The problem was practical. With hundreds of newly paid cowboys, cheap whiskey, and the fame of Wild Bill Hickok as marshal, each extra beat of the banjo increased the chance of a fight. The bell toll served as a truce. Lights dimmed, faro tables were overturned, and everyone had 20 minutes to finish their drink. When the orchestra dared to prolong a 2-step, the sheriff confiscated the violin and accordion as evidence of the offense. Reports from the Abilene Chronicle show that the town, by that time, preferred to lose a few notes in the wee hours than gain more graves on the hill at dawn. The dance until midnight lasted only briefly. In 1872, the cattle moved on to Dodge City, but the legend of the bell that silenced the saloon remained as an example of an improvised law to curb the excess of pistols and square dance steps. Number 13. Ban on celebratory gunfire. In the summer of 1878, the early hours in Dodge City sounded like an irregular drumbeat. Every closed deal, every win at faro, or simple birthday ended with gunslingers firing into the air. Stray bullets would penetrate adobe ranch roofs and embed themselves in wagons still rolling at dawn. When a child was hit by brick fragments, the city council met in haste. The minutes of July 9th recorded the new rule. Any celebratory shot fired within the limits of Front Street would incur a $25 fine, weapon confiscation, and, on repeat offense, 1 month in the makeshift jail behind City Hall. Marshal Charlie Bassett, flanked by newly hired assistants, patrolled the following nights, confiscating still warm revolvers. Dozens were hung like trophies on the counter at the Long Branch. Realizing the law was affecting his own crowd, saloon musician Smokey Moore replaced the shout "Hurrah!" with the crack of a whip against the floor. The trend caught on. Within weeks, visitors imitated the leather snap, loud as a gunshot, but without the risk of falling debris. Number 14. No foam in the drinking trough. In 1877, the gold rush had already brought 10,000 people to Deadwood, but clean water remained scarce in that narrow Black Hills Valley. Along Main Street, horses drank from large troughs hewn from pine logs. At night, after hours in dusty mines, some miners silently climbed onto the edge, stripped off their clothes, and dived in for an improvised bath. The practice soon caused friction. Animals refused to drink when the water carried soap or lamp oil running off beards. In a session on June 14th, the City Council passed Ordinance Number 22, imposing a $5 fine on anyone who washes body, clothes, or tools in public troughs. Repeat offenders would spend a day in jail and be forced to clean the trough with a hoe. Sheriff Seth Bullock sent patrols at sunrise, collecting buckets and soaps, while the Black Hills pioneer praised the measure for protecting both the horses and the city's olfactory sanity. Shortly after, hotels strung sheets on poles and charged 10 cents for a tub bath, an alternative that, although costly, dried up Deadwood's odd equine bathing pool. Number 15. Trotting speed limit, the Old West hourglass radar. Before traffic lights or signs existed, Tombstone and Dodge City held the reins short on those who liked to show off speed. In April 1880, the Tombstone Council recorded in the minutes that horses could not exceed the trot, about 8 kilometers per hour, on Allen Street. The fine was $3, rising to 10 if dust kicked up by hooves injured passers-by or scattered merchandise from store counters. 2 years later, Dodge City adopted an identical rule for Front Street, now remembered through photos full of wagons. Marshals measured excess by watching if the animal covered 2 blocks before the sand in a pocket hourglass ran out. A simple method, but feared by hasty coachmen. Newspapers reported the arrest of John Pettica Carter, a cowboy who tried to win a bet on who could reach the Long Branch first. He lost the challenge, his saddle, and $6 in court costs. The order survived until 1890, when wider streets and rubber brakes reduced the risk, rendering the unlikely hourglass radar obsolete. Number 16. Firearms at home, firearms at the counter. In the Western Territories, the same law that preached martial readiness obliged men between 18 and 45 to keep a rifle at home for possible militia call-ups. Tombstone adopted such a rule in July 1881. Every head of household had to display a carbine in shooting condition on the day of the local census. In the same month, however, the council passed Ordinance Number 9, prohibiting carrying weapons within the urban perimeter, except by direct order of the sheriff. The result was a curious ritual. Farmers arrived on Allen Street with a Winchester slung over the shoulder, stepped through the doors of the Grand Hotel, left the rifle at the counter and signed a receipt. Those who skipped the deposit paid a $5 fine or spent the night in the adobe cell. Virgil Earp, then acting marshal, came to store up to 30 shotguns each Saturday. All were returned at sunset when the owners retreated to their farms. Thus, the town balanced the duty of territorial defense with the urgency of keeping streets free of nervous triggers, a testament that the Old West also legislated for safety, not always simply but always firmly. Number 17. Closed doors, female exclusion in saloons. When kerosene lanterns began to sway over the bars of Tombstone, Deadwood, or Virginia City, respectable women knew that entry was barred. Between 1870 and 1890, many mining towns adopted ordinances limiting female presence in saloons to 3 categories: stage singer, waitress, or entertainer, and all had to be registered with the sheriff. The rationale was twofold: to preserve the wives' reputations and to avoid jealousy-fueled fights. In Dodge City, bylaw number 14 imposed a $5 fine on unemployed women caught after 8 at night. In Leadville, the 1883 code granted patrolmen the right to escort them immediately to the nearest church. To circumvent the prohibition, some boarding house owners obtained temporary licenses as lunch attendants, and in exchange for a tip, accompanied traveling husbands to the faro tables. Meanwhile, in Cheyenne, the Gem Saloon reserved a sidebar, separated by a velvet curtain, where ladies could taste port wine without being seen from the main room. These temporary arrangements, however, did not eliminate the core of the law. In most of the Old West, the bar was male territory by municipal decree, and crossing that threshold without a work badge still invited a fine or public embarrassment. Number 18. $5 spitting fine. When Cheyenne still smelled of freshly tanned buffalo hide, the wooden sidewalks were stained by splashes of chewing tobacco. In 1885, the Wyoming leader described the hazard. Ladies had to lift their skirts to avoid bringing the brown mud into their homes. At night, improvised spitters, empty bean cans, became traps for sweaty boots. Municipal Dr. John Finney warned that the habit spread diphtheria and typhus through the dry dust the wind kicked up. On September 11th of that year, the council approved Ordinance Number 47. Any person who spits on a public way or commercial building floor will be fined $5 or, failing payment, detained for a day in the lockup. Guards posted red posters depicting a spit crossed out with an X. Hoteliers installed green porcelain spittoons imported from St. Louis. Records show over 100 citations in the first winter, including cowboys who claimed aiming accidents. The law didn't eradicate smoking, but it drove the brown spray from the central sidewalks, turning spitting, an everyday act on the prairie, into a luxury few were willing to pay for. Number 19. Gambling ban on Sundays, the silence of the chips. When the drills fell silent at the Comstock load, the miners of Virginia City rushed to the gambling houses on C Street, where roulette wheels exhaled kerosene and the clink of coins drowned out any catechism. In 1878, however, the Nevada Territorial Legislature passed a blue law that would close the tables on the day of rest. Sheriff Henry Morse received orders to padlock doors at 6 a.m. on Sunday and stationed 2 deputies to patrol the hallways until Monday dawn. Nighttime gamblers responded by inventing literary clubs that in practice traded verses for small-stakes poker. Law officers, ever vigilant, began fining any room found with green felt, whether cards were present or not. The columns of the Territorial Enterprise recount that the first Sunday of enforcement felt like a funeral holiday. Player pianos fell silent, the sidewalk echoed with empty boots, and only St. Mary's in the mountains rang full. Even so, municipal revenue increased. Each violation cost $25, and in 9 months, over 200 tickets padded the public coffers. The Sunday veto held until 1881, when pressure from saloon keepers, citing losses in traveler lodging, convinced Carson City to repeal it. Still, the memory remained of a brief interlude in which the capital of the Western gaming trade learned that chips, too, knew how to keep quiet. Number 20. Challenge to the shadows, the ban on dueling in New Mexico. In 1868, with the fresh memory of gunslingers meeting at dawn to settle bar table offenses, the territorial government of New Mexico enacted the act to suppress the practice of dueling. The text was straightforward. Whoever accepts, sends, or carries a challenge message or serves as second commits a felony. The penalty could reach 2 years in prison in Santa Fe and lifelong loss of the right to hold public office. Yet honor still weighed more than the territorial code for many ranchers in the Rio Grande Valley. To circumvent the law, seconds began arranging meetings outside the plazas, in ditches lined with cottonwoods or on the hills behind Socorro, where shots echoed without official witnesses. Military cartographers recorded at least 8 clearings used between 1870 and 1882, always before sunrise. Still, the mere existence of the law changed the ritual. Weapons were loaded with a single bullet, allowing for only light injuries that let the parties declare their honor satisfied and avoid inquiry. When New Mexico entered the Union in 1912, Local newspapers already treated dueling as a relic, a testament that the 1868 decree had not extinguished the trigger of vanity, but had pushed it into the shadows until it became an anachronism incompatible with state justice. Number 21. Mail babies. In January 1913, the United States Post Office began accepting packages weighing up to 22 kilograms. In a rural corner of Ohio, Jesse and Matilda Beagle weighed their daughter May, affixed 15-cent stamps to the collar of her coat, and handed her to the mail carrier to visit her grandmother 3 kilometers away, cheaper than a train ticket. The story leaked to the New York Tribune, and within 6 months, railway mail service carriers had made at least 8 documented human deliveries. Babies went inside egg baskets wrapped in blankets and labeled with their address. The postal worker walked through the train car displaying the package as a curiosity. In 1914, the case of Charlotte May Pierstorff, shipped 120 kilometers in Idaho for 53 cents, outraged senators. The Postmaster General issued a circular prohibiting the transport of human beings, even under any definition of a pet. The episode shows how far penny pinching could drive families on the fringes of the late Old West. Number 22. Home run at the garrison, the baseball of the Buffalo Soldiers. When they weren't patrolling the borders, the soldiers of the 10th Cavalry, known as Buffalo Soldiers, swapped their sabers for bats. At Fort Keogh, Montana, Captain Edward Godfrey formed in 1892, a regimental team to train discipline and ease racial tensions with civilians. Photographic archives show the diamond marked out with a hoe, bases of old canvas, and grandstands of blue uniforms mixed with the flannel dresses of local families. Games against neighboring ranches attracted modest bets, and according to the Miles City Journal, some cowboys lost their hats betting on their own team. The informal league spread. Fort Huachuca, Arizona, fielded a roster in 1896, and in 1906 the 9th Cavalry won the Department of the Pacific Championship. The sport promoted mutual respect even before Jackie Robinson was born, proving that on the flat field, without rank distinctions, skill with the bat earned more applause than any decoration. Number 23. Cactus Whisper, Nevada's Ghost Telegraph. To save on poles in the rocky steppe between Tonopah and Goldfield, Western Union engineers in 1904 ordered porcelain insulators to be nailed to the thick arms of the saguaros. The desert seemed a free solution, height guaranteed, rare wood spared, but the cactus's resinous sap, mixed with water, seeped into the screws, creating conductive bridges that fluctuated with the midday heat. Goldfield telegraph operators complained of ghosts on the line, garbled punctuation, letters stretched into endless hyphens. One operator recorded the first unintentional SOS in history, a product of the plant's thermal expansion at dusk. After 3 summers of futile maintenance, the company relented. It brought tar and iron poles from Oregon and abandoned the green, thorny route. The episode landed in internal reports as a lesson that, under the Mojave sun, even an immobile giant can pull an electric prank. Number 24. Bone Orchards Cleanup Day. In Kansas in 1889, the mayor of Dodge City decreed the first cemetery cleanup day. Called Bone Orchards, the cemeteries had crooked crosses and buffalo skulls forgotten in the grass. Once a year, cowboys without cattle driving duties swapped lassos for hoes. They repaired fences, painted epitaphs worn away by the wind, and lined up white bovine bones as new section markers. Traveling photographers, sniffing out unusual portraits, captured men with Colt belts applying lime to makeshift tombstones. The city offered a free barrel of beer and proclaimed that cleaning the past guarantees peace for the future. The tradition lasted the decade. When the Santa Fe Railroad extended its tracks in 1907, workers found the cemetery already pruned and marked, proof that even the rowdiest town in the West set aside a day for silence, fresh paint, and respect for souls that no longer had a voice. Number 25. The Orchestra of Bars, the Yuma Prison Band. Between the scorched walls of the Yuma Territorial Prison in Arizona, inmates formed in 1905 a brass band that rivaled civilian ensembles. instruments purchased by subscription from local merchants, fearful of riots, arrived via the Southern Pacific train, gleaming tubas, euphoniums, and 2 chipped clarinets. They rehearsed at dusk when the Colorado River breeze eased the 45 degrees Celsius heat. That Christmas, the Yuma prison band played Stars and Stripes Forever in the town square. Residents paid 10 cents for a seat, funds that went toward books for the prison library. Sheriff Frank Meade reported that after each concert, fights in the yard decreased, perhaps from rehearsal fatigue, perhaps because the music reminded the men that harmony still existed beyond the bars. In 1911, when the prison closed, many musicians were granted parole on the condition they joined bands in nearby towns, spreading a melody born among the hot adobe walls across the desert.